the
This is
invisible
your
man.
fault.
No, it's
David
not. I
walked
didn't do
through
anything.
the kitchen door after another long day at the construction firm where he had worked for the past 8 years. He loosened his tie and smiled, thinking about the dinner Laura had mentioned cooking that morning. For 15 years, he had loved this woman through every season of their life, through the birth of their 2 daughters, Emma and Sophie, through financial struggles and personal triumphs. He had always believed that love was something you showed up for every single day, not just in grand gestures, but in the small moments. He found Laura in the living room, scrolling through her phone. She barely glanced up when he entered. Their connection had once been electric, but lately it felt like they were living in the same house as strangers rather than partners. Laura had become consumed with her social circle and her new business venture, which David supported completely, but he missed her. He missed the woman who used to laugh at his terrible jokes and hold his hand while they watched movies on the couch. The dinner table was set with care, and Emma and Sophie were already seated when David arrived. Laura looked beautiful as always, but there was something distant in her eyes, something cold. The conversation started pleasantly enough until David mentioned an idea he had been thinking about for weeks, a family vacation, somewhere peaceful where they could disconnect from their busy lives and remember why they fell in love. He reached across the table and gently touched Laura's hand. His voice was warm and hopeful. "Maybe we could go to that lake house in Vermont next month. What do you think? It would be nice for us to spend time together, away from everything." Laura paused for a moment, then she shook her head with a dismissive wave. Her laugh was sharp and cutting, like ice breaking under pressure. "A lake house, David, really? You think that kind of simple thing is going to fix what is broken here?" She glanced at their daughters with a smirk, as if inviting them into her mockery. "Your father lives in such a fantasy world, girls. He thinks a vacation will solve all our problems." Emma and Sophie exchanged uncomfortable glances. They loved their father deeply, and seeing their mother humiliate him in front of them made them feel torn and sad. David felt his chest tighten, but he remained calm. He had learned long ago that reacting in anger only gave Laura more ammunition. She continued speaking, her voice dripping with sarcasm while she looked directly at him. "You know what, David? Maybe if you spent less time thinking about these ridiculous fantasy vacations and more time being a real partner, maybe I would actually want to spend time with you. You are so out of touch, so weak, really." She laughed again, laughing with cruelty, and looked back at her phone as if the conversation was already boring to her. David felt something shift inside him. In that moment, something fundamental changed. He realized that he had spent 15 years loving someone who did not love him back, someone who had grown contemptuous of his kindness and misinterpreted his devotion as weakness. He had tried everything to reach her, and yet she continued to push him away, using cruelty as her weapon. He looked at his daughters and saw the pain in their eyes, pain that their mother had caused, not just to him, but to them as well. Without anger, without drama, without begging, David simply stood up from his chair. He placed his napkin on the table and looked directly at Laura with eyes that were calm and clear. "I love you," he said quietly, "and I have always tried to be the best husband and father I could be. But I cannot love someone who does not respect me, and I cannot stay in a place where my love is treated as weakness." Then David looked at his daughters, smiled at them with genuine warmth, and walked toward the door. Behind him, he heard Laura say something sharp, but he did not turn around. He stepped out into the evening air and closed the door behind him, knowing that he was choosing himself for the very first time in this marriage. And in that moment, something that looked like defeat was actually the most powerful act of self-love he had ever shown.
The wake of silence. 3 weeks had passed since David walked out of that house, and Laura still could not believe he was actually gone. She kept expecting him to call, to text, to show up at the door begging her forgiveness, as he had done so many times in the past whenever they had serious arguments. But this time was different. This time, David did not come back. Laura sat in her office during her lunch break, staring at her phone, willing it to ring. The silence was deafening, and it terrified her in ways she had not anticipated. She had convinced herself that David was weak, that his love was suffocating, that his devotion was boring. But now, facing the reality of his absence, she realized how wrong she had been. His presence had been the steadying force in her life, the one constant that made everything else feel safe and secure. Without him, the world felt unbalanced and cold. Emma and Sophie barely spoke to her anymore. They went through the motions of being her daughters, but there was a distance there, a resentment that broke her heart every single day. Sophie had confronted her one evening after school, her 16-year-old eyes filled with tears and anger. "Mom, how could you talk to Dad like that? He has done everything for us, everything for you, and you treated him like he was nothing." Emma, who was 18, had simply stopped coming home some nights, choosing to spend time at friends' houses or staying at her boyfriend's place because home no longer felt like home. Laura had destroyed something precious without fully understanding what she was destroying. The business that had consumed so much of her attention now felt hollow and meaningless. She had built it to prove something to herself, to show that she was more than just a wife and mother. But in proving that, she had lost the most important thing. She had lost David. She had lost respect in her daughter's eyes, and she had lost her own sense of self-respect as well. Laura called her mother, hoping for comfort, but even her mother was disappointed in her. "You treated that man like royalty, and he loved you unconditionally," her mother had said, "and you threw it away. For what?" Laura did not have an answer. She had thrown it away for ego, for pride, for the need to be right and to make David feel small. She hired a private investigator to find out where David was staying and learned that he had taken an apartment across town. He was working the same job, but he seemed to be thriving somehow. His coworkers said he was happier, more at peace than he had ever been. David had used their separation to rebuild himself, to remember who he was before he became so consumed with trying to make his marriage work. He had gone to therapy and started running again, things he loved before his marriage had drained him of his passion. One night, Laura drove past his apartment building and saw him through the window, laughing with a group of friends. She barely recognized him because the smile on his face was genuine and free. It was a smile she had not seen in years, one that she herself had stolen from him through her cruelty and indifference. He looked happier without her, and that realization shattered her more than anything else could have done. The mirror of truth. 2 months into the separation, Laura found herself attending therapy for the first time in her life. Her therapist was a kind woman named Patricia, who did not judge her, but who also did not let her off the hook. Patricia made Laura look at her own behavior, really look at it without the excuses and justifications Laura had been hiding behind. Patricia asked her a simple question that changed everything. If someone treated you the way you treated David, what would you do? How would you feel? Laura could not answer at first because the truth was so painful. She would have left too. She would have walked away without looking back, just as David had done. Patricia explained to her that when we treat people with contempt and disrespect, we are essentially telling them that they are not worthy of our kindness and respect. Laura realized that her cruelty toward David had stemmed from her own insecurities. She had felt inadequate as a woman, and so she had tried to make him feel inadequate as a man. She had felt like she was losing control of her life, and so she had tried to control him through mockery and dismissal. She had been selfish, she had been unkind, and she had been willing to sacrifice her marriage and her daughter's well-being for the sake of her own wounded ego. The worst part was knowing that David had never done anything to deserve her treatment. He had supported her dreams. He had been faithful. He had been a devoted father and a loving husband. He had simply loved her and asked for love in return. And instead of giving him that, she had taken it and twisted it into something that made him feel worthless. Laura began to understand that real strength was not in being right or in making others feel small. Real strength was in vulnerability, in admitting when you were wrong, in asking for forgiveness and meaning it. She had spent so much of her life trying to prove that she was strong that she had forgotten what true strength actually looked like. She had seen it every day in David, but she had been too blind to recognize it. She wrote David a letter, not expecting him to respond, but needing to express what she had learned. She told him that she took full responsibility for her actions, that she understood why he had left, and that she did not expect him to forgive her or to come back. She acknowledged that she had hurt him and their daughters in ways that might take years to heal. She told him that seeing his happiness made her realize that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone go, even if it breaks your own heart. 3 weeks after sending the letter, Laura received a response, not from David, but from Emma. Emma had read the letter to her father, and Emma wanted to talk to her mother. They met at a coffee shop, and Emma was direct and honest, just like her father. "Mom, Dad is the best person we know, and the way you treated him was not okay. You made him feel like his love did not matter, and that was cruel." Emma paused, and her voice softened slightly. "But I can see that you are trying to understand what you did, and that means something. I think you owe it to yourself and to us to become a better person."
The unexpected reunion. 6 months had passed since David left, and so much had changed. Laura had thrown herself into therapy and personal development. She had also made amends with Emma and Sophie, rebuilding her relationship with her daughters based on honesty and accountability. She had learned to listen without defending herself, to see others' perspectives, and to value their feelings above her own need to be right. Sitting with her daughters, talking openly. One evening, as Laura was leaving her office building, she literally ran into David. He was there meeting with a contractor about a renovation project for a client, and he was just as surprised to see her as she was to see him, freezing in place. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The last 6 months flashed through both of their minds, all the pain, all the growth, all the healing that had happened separately. David looked different. He looked stronger, more settled, more at peace with himself. But when he saw Laura, he did not look angry. He looked sad, the kind of sad that comes from loving someone and accepting that it may never be the same again. Laura did not know what to say, so she simply told him the truth. "I have been in therapy. I have been working on myself. I have apologized to our daughters, and I understand now why you left. I do not expect anything from you, but I needed you to know that I see what I did, and I am truly sorry." David listened to her, and he heard the sincerity in her words. He had heard enough stories from people in his own therapy sessions to know the difference between someone who is genuinely changed and someone who is just performing a show. Laura was not performing. She was being vulnerable and honest. Studying her face carefully. He thanked her for telling him that, and he told her that he was glad she was working on herself, for her own sake and for their daughter's sake. They talked for nearly an hour there in the lobby of her office building. They did not resolve everything. They did not suddenly decide to get back together. The wounds were too deep, and the trust had been broken. But something shifted between them. There was a gentle recognition of each other's humanity and a quiet respect for the journeys they were each taking. David told her that he had been seeing someone, a kind woman named Michelle, who had helped him remember what it felt like to be valued and appreciated. He told her that he wished things could have been different, that he still cared about her, but that he could not be with someone who made him feel small. He said he had to protect his own heart and his own dignity, just as she was learning to do the same. Laura felt a sharp pain when he mentioned Michelle, but she also felt something else. She felt genuinely happy for him because she could see in his eyes that he was happy, and she realized that sometimes love meant wanting good things for someone even if you could not be the one to give those good things to them. Tears streaming down her face. She reached out and squeezed his hand gently. "Thank you for giving me 15 years, she said softly, "and thank you for teaching me what love is supposed to look like."
David squeezed her hand back and smiled at her with kindness, but also with finality. "Take care of yourself," he said, "and take care of Emma and Sophie. They need their mother to be strong and whole."
The lessons we learn. 1 year after David walked out of that house, Laura stood in her therapist Patricia's office, reflecting on everything that had changed, sitting with clarity in her eyes. She had not gotten her husband back, but she had gotten something far more valuable. She had gotten herself back. She had rebuilt her relationship with her daughters on a foundation of honesty and accountability. She had learned to listen to people without dismissing them, to value their emotions and perspectives. She had learned that being right was far less important than being kind. Emma was preparing for college, and Sophie had just been accepted to a prestigious high school program. Both girls had forgiven their mother, but they also watched her carefully, making sure that she was truly changing and not just saying the words without meaning them. Laura worked hard every single day to be the kind of mother and woman that deserved that trust. She had also learned to be alone and to find fulfillment within herself rather than constantly seeking validation from others. She still worked in her business, but she had learned to find balance. She had learned to say no to social events when her daughters needed her. She had learned that ambition was not a bad thing, but it should never come at the expense of the people who love you. Patricia asked her one afternoon, "What have you learned from all of this?" Laura paused and thought carefully about her answer. "I have learned that contempt is the poison of relationships," she said slowly. "When you start to look at your partner with contempt, when you start to believe that they are weak or foolish or beneath you, it becomes impossible to love them. I took David for granted because his love was consistent and steady. I thought that meant he was weak, when really it meant he was strong. I have learned that kindness is not weakness," she continued. Laura thought about all the times she had mocked David for being kind, for wanting family time, for trying to connect with her. "I made him feel small for the very qualities that made him a good man, and I lost him because of it. I hurt my daughters, and I hurt myself because I could not see the value in what was right in front of me. Most importantly," Laura said with conviction, "I have learned that you cannot change other people. You can only change yourself. And I have learned that changing yourself requires humility, requires admitting when you are wrong, requires being vulnerable. And all of that is actually the hardest and bravest thing a person can do." She saw David occasionally now, always with warmth and respect, but with the understanding that some things once broken cannot be put back together exactly as they were. David had moved on with Michelle and seemed genuinely happy. Laura had learned to be genuinely happy for him, even though it was not easy. Emma and Sophie had a better relationship with both of their parents now, because David and Laura had both done the work to heal themselves. They had shown their daughters that it was never too late to change, that admitting your mistakes was a sign of strength, not weakness. They had shown them what real love looked like, not in the romantic sense, but in the everyday choices to be kind, to listen, to respect, and to keep growing. Lessons and learning points from the story. The danger of contempt in relationships. Laura's greatest mistake was not a single act, but a pattern of behavior where she began to view David with contempt. She mocked his ideas, belittled his efforts, and made him feel small. The story teaches us that once contempt enters a relationship, it becomes almost impossible to maintain love and respect. Relationships require us to see the goodness in our partners, even when we are frustrated or unhappy. We must guard against the tendency to use cruelty as a weapon against those we claim to love. Mistaking kindness for weakness. David showed tremendous kindness and devotion, but Laura interpreted these qualities as weakness. Rather than appreciating his steady love and support, she used it against him. The story reminds us that true strength often looks like gentleness, like patience, like the willingness to keep trying.
This is a crucial lesson, especially in relationships where we must learn to value consistency and loyalty over dominance and control. The consequences of